Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Welcome back to a partial in-person, but still remote quarterly board meeting. This is Tony Luisi. I'm the board chair and director of DEC Region 4. We'll do quick introductions at the board level. I don't have the computer in front of me, but it looks like we have, well, in the room with me is Chris Hauber, Harvey Alexander, Nancy Pearson at the board, and remote, we have Stephen Rice, a citizen member, Mike Tengler on behalf of the town of Colony, Brad Glass on behalf of the city of Albany, Peter Barber, supervisor of the town of Guilderland, Gabriela Cebada Mora on behalf of New York State Parks, and I think John Brust, yep, and Mike McLaughlin on behalf of the county of Albany. Who did I miss?
That's it. We have Bob C. from the Friends. That's it.
All right.
Okay.
And of course, staff from the Pine Bush in the room. And
Yeah, it should be.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right, cool.
for sure.
First order of business is to consider the minutes from the March 17th board meeting that were included in your board packets. Is there any discussion on those minutes? And if not, can we have a motion to accept?
Motion.
There's Nancy and Harvey.
Nancy and Harvey.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, minutes accepted. Next up, this is an open meeting with opportunities for input from the public. Is there anyone from the public who would care to provide any comments? Okay, we will move right along to our reports. So I'll kick us off. So since our last meeting, the state budget was finalized, and in terms of just some brief highlights from this year's budget, there was an additional $1.2 billion for the Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act. $2 billion, and that goes to the voters this November. In addition, the budget includes an additional $500 million in clean water infrastructure funding, bringing the state's total clean water investment to $4.5 billion since 2017. In addition, the budget contains $400 million for the Environmental Protection Fund. And in good news for the Pine Bush, this year's appropriation increased from $2.675 million to $3 million. In addition, it was great to see the return of Lupin Fest last month, but I'll refrain from that because I'm sure that'll be covered in Chris's report. But I'll say that myself and on behalf of my family, we had a great time. So it was good to see that was back. And that covers my reports. Are there any other reports from any other members of the board?
I will second your Lupin Fest comments. It was a wonderful event. It was so nice to see everyone there, and the staff always did such an amazing job of putting that on. So kudos to everyone who was there working very hard.
Thank you, Nancy.
And just checking for people attending remotely, is the audio okay? Can you hear everybody in the room here?
Yes.
Yes, it comes
Okay, thank you.
across very well.
Great. Excellent. All right, thank you, Nancy. Any other board reports? Hearing none, I'll turn it to you, Chris.
Okay. Just in the sake of trying to end maybe a little early, because we know some folks might have to leave by 11 or before. I'll just point you to the update in our board packet. Please go through that. There's lots of things that have been going on for the last quarter. I'll show that on my screen here for you. But from every department, lots of things going on. Please take a look. Like I said, yeah, just to reiterate, Lupin Fest. We haven't had a Lupin Fest in person since 2019, obviously because of COVID. We did in 2020, like a lot of places pivot, use that trite term. We pivoted completely and we did a virtual Lupin Fest, which was kind of fun. We did that again for 21, but we pulled it off this year, 22 in person. Jackie Citroniti was the coordinator for this year, but all the staff participated. There was a lot of effort. We had almost 2,000 people. And it was really hot. Everybody was there. You know how hot it was, and didn't keep people away. So pretty proud of the whole event. I also, let's see, how do I do this? Please bear with me as I show my screen instead of holding it up in front of the smartboard. All right, never mind that one. Okay, so the annual report is complete this year. It is up on our website, and I will send that to everyone after the board meeting. Thank you to the directors team and working with their staff for the content, especially for Wendy Craney, who put that together. She puts that together every year, and I have that here. Actually, you can see it. So it's a nice report. We have hard copies if anybody wants them, but I will send a link to the website. I'd like to introduce Beth McCullum. Hi, Beth.
Hello.
Beth is our new outreach volunteer coordinator. Beth started
April 1st.
Yeah, I was going to say 2 months ago. 2.5, almost 3. Previously, we had Jody Nash in the position, a similar position. Jody and her family moved to Tennessee in 2020. She worked part-time for us, basically, over that period from Tennessee remotely. And we decided it was time to hire full-time, and we were fortunate to find Beth. So welcome, Beth. Let's see. In the one final thing, there's a board survey in your board packet. We do that every year. That is required by the Public Authorities Law, and it's also we have to submit it to the authority's budget office. So that too is in your packet, and I'll just breeze through that so you know it's there. So the board packet is here, 2022 board evaluations for board performance. And I think that's it. And then I can stop there and turn it over to Neil.
Hey, Chris, John here. Was there anything in the board evaluations that we need to talk about?
No, frankly, there was the one, everybody completely agreed, and that the one individual that partially agreed, that you saw it. Can you see that, John? I'll go back up. Here, someone agreed. That was Supervisor Crummy. He said, it's pretty hard to do this evaluation, even though I know I have to, based on one board meeting. And he's right. So he somewhat agrees, but he doesn't really have the experience to do that. So, does that help, John?
Yes, thanks, Chris. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Okay.
All right. For the sake of the people online, it would be better if I stood over here.
Yeah, you can stay there. That's fine, right?
Patty, you can all see me as well.
I'm fine, thank you.
Nice to see everyone for the quarterly report for the technical committee. You have within your packet now, there are technical committee report number 63. So starting with the table, overall, the town of Colony remains the most active community with 5 active projects in the study area, 3 of which are new this quarter. The city of Albany remains pretty quiet with no new development projects. The city continues their efforts to satisfy their 2005 landfill expansion permit requirements and the mitigation associated with that. Primarily, it's still ecological monitoring and invasive species management on the city's lands around the landfill, but they have now initiated the actual closure and restoration of the closed Greater Albany landfill, the oldest part of the landfill. This is an incremental process that will probably take at least 3 years just to close the GAL itself. But the first couple areas of sand have been deposited, and seeding of native plants and cover crop has begun this spring. Additionally, everyone should note that in the past, the city was using Applied Ecological Services as their ecological consultant. Applied Applied Ecological Services was acquired by a larger company called Resource Environmental Services, RES is what they go by. And there are some new staff online with the project, and we've been meeting with them, and I know they've begun meeting with Region 4 staff. And things are a little bit behind schedule, but everybody's getting up to speed. So it seems like the project continues to do well. I think the city is doing very well, at least from the perspective of their ecological restoration work.
So our plans then are to continue with them as is?
Yes, so the whole ecological restoration project is a condition requirement within DEC's permit to the city.
But there's no changes?
No changes. So staff changes, and with the staff changes, there have been a few logistical glitches in getting everybody up to speed on the background, but it's going well. Thanks for asking. Within the town of Gilman, there's nothing new in particular. The pyramid projects, and the pyramid in the town successfully defended their Article 78 appeal by Save the Pine Bush, so we expect those projects to begin moving forward soon. And within the town of Colony, the Eden Renewables Leishkill Community Solar Project is the biggest project at 73 acres within a full protection area. They are currently before the Zoning Board of Appeals in the town for a zoning variance. Absent being able to protect that property and given their stated plans and mitigation, the project appears as compatible with the Commission's 2017 management plan as we could hope. The ZBA decision is anticipated in August, and if successful, the planning board would begin their review after that. The other new projects in the town of Colony are all relatively small in their footprint, but all of them are within areas recommended for full protection, and they're all immediately adjacent to existing preserved lands. So not necessarily without impacts.
And Neil, has the commission submitted formal comments
On all three new projects, yes. Yep. And lastly, at your last meeting, the last quarter, you all, the board asked the staff to begin the process of reviewing the management plan and evaluating whether or not it needs to be updated, consistent with Environmental Conservation Law Article 46. So we have initiated that process. All of the staff are in the process of reading not only the main body of the plan, but also the respective appendices, environmental plan, carbon recovery plan, etc. And I hope to have a more thorough update for you and potentially some recommendations at your December meeting. But given the size of that document, the number of staff, the technical committee members involved, it's probably going to take us some time. Anybody have any questions for me? Great. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Lisa.
Good to have everybody. See everybody on Zoom. Okay, so this is a financial report as of April. Not too much going on. It's 1 month of the fiscal year. Starting with the revenue, we have the revenue side first. Using contributions, the budget is zero. This is our quarterly contribution, and we have a small donation of $150. Government grants, slightly lower, 99% of budget, just due to less spending, as you'll see down below. In April, we have quite a bit of spending in March for the fiscal year end. So we have a little bit less in April. Mitigation fees. This is something we didn't budget, and this is not cash. This is our national grid from deferred revenue, which you will see on the balance sheet. We used a little bit in salaries to burn on the prescribed burn side. So we're finally using a little bit of that. Lease revenue is on budget, and other revenue is higher than budget slightly due to increased merchandise sales in the gift shop. So revenue is really on budget for the month of April. Personnel and fringe on the expense side, 99% of budget. And the next categories are very slightly. Again, it's April due to budget timing and expenses for the month of April. Travel and training is within $64. Contractual, $352. Communications, $362. Occupancy, which is our utilities. We paid a lot of those in March to catch up for the fiscal year. Is a little bit under. Occupancy is 502. Supplies and equipment, $153 under. Other expenses under, and this is due to our marketing and promotion, which we flipped from prepaid from last year into this fiscal year. So pretty much our revenue expenses came in right on budget, giving us an operating surplus of $1,900. And if we look below that, I try to list our non-cash expenses. Depreciation starts $23,000 on budget. Our net loss on investments was $431,000, and we'll get to that on the balance sheet. So giving us a change in net position, which would be, our audited figures would be $452,903 as a loss. Any questions on that?
Could you just repeat that last number, 152,000?
452,903. Going on to the statement of net assets, our balance sheet, cash and cash equivalent are slightly lower. This is due to, we had a big payment last year from DEC that was owed for 2 previous quarters. So we spent a little bit in April, and we didn't receive our DEC payment until May, which leads us to the next grants receivable is $363,000. This is all DEC money owed. We were paid $101,000 in May, so it decreased slightly. Accounts receivable is 0. And this is due to mitigation being paid. Inventory remains the same. Prepaid expenses decreased $99,000, and you will see this every year from March into April. It's expenses we record in our fiscal year that are not actually realized until the next fiscal year. So we pay, for example, a contract that starts in April. We have to record that in prepaid, and we flip that from March to April. Investments decreased $431,000, really due to market conditions, negative performance in all 4 funds. Good news is we gained $35,000 in May. Let's cross our fingers on that for June. And the capital assets decreased $23,000. This is due to just depreciation expense. Land and deferred outflows from New York State retirement remained the same. So total assets decreased $454,000. And this, again, is mainly due to a decrease. On the liability side, not much here, $600. This is our accrued expenses. Just gained a little bit there. Deferred revenue, as you saw on the revenue side, this is our national grid money that we really utilize. So hopefully we'll utilize some more of that. OPEB liability and net pension liability remain the same. So the total liabilities decreased $1,400, and this is just due to the deferred revenue being utilized from National Grid. Total net assets, $23,000 in capital assets decreased due to depreciation expense. Reserved assets remain the same, and unreserved assets decreased $429,000, giving us a decrease in total net assets of $452,903. And this is our operating surplus of $2,432,000 loss, and investment in depreciation expense of $23,000. Questions? The investment side, first time since I have been here, we had a decrease in all 4 funds. Again, that's the market. $134,000 in the reserve fund decrease, a loss in the Discovery Center endowment of $9,000, the endowment $256,000, and our OPEB reserve $31,000, giving us a total loss of $431,000 for the month of April. Any questions? Thank you, everybody. Good to see everybody.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
All right, moving on. We have 5 action items to cover today. And the first one, action item number A, is to consider a proposed resolution confirming that the commission neither acquired nor disposed of any, did not acquire any property in fiscal year 21-22. Should that be real property?
Should be real property, and there's a typo in B. It should be fiscal year 21-22. That's my mistake.
Okay. So
Is that correct?
So we'll make those 2 corrections. And just as a point of clarification, would this include any land acquired by the Mohawk Hudson Land Conservancy managed through our MOU?
No, this is only required for any land that we take title to or dispose of.
Okay. What about conservation easements?
That is not included in this either. Okay. But to further answer the question, Mohawk Hudson did not acquire any lands for the preserve in the past fiscal year, nor were any conservation easements acquired.
should we then say did not require title, any real property? Did not require title or dispose of title, any real property?
You can, yeah. This mimics the language from the public authorities.
Oh, okay.
Which way do you want it? Do you want it title?
Let's mimic the language from the law.
Yeah.
Blame someone else if they don't like it.
I've already got a typo in it, that's not great.
So if we could change sub A to include the word real before the word property, and sub B to change the fiscal year date.
Yeah, great, thanks, Patty.
Okay, all right, can we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Harvey and Nancy are the same day.
They're muted and they take some time.
Yeah,
That's the benefit of being in person.
Yeah.
All right,
You're free to move next time.
Okay.
all in favor?
Aye.
And any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
All right, moving on to action item number, or letter B. This is for public authority compliance documents, and I would ask maybe Chris to help walk us through some of the details.
Sure. These are requirements at the end of the fiscal year for public authorities with fiscal years based on April 1 to March 31. So the first is the assessment of internal controls. That document, that statement document follows this action item. That is specifically tied to the audit, which we'll hear from Mr. Frucci from Majeski. There's the inner report on the prompt payment policy, which basically states that we paid our vendors within 30 days if their bills were accurate, which we did. There's the procurement report. The full report follows this as well, but there's the link to it. That's up on the website. That's all procurement or expenses to vendors of $5,000 or more. And then finally, there's the Paris annual report financial summary. The annual report is the largest report that we submit, that Lisa works on with Patty and me to submit. And this financial summary itself also ties right back into the audit, those numbers. And that's required to go in front of the board as well. So those are the four that go into this.
So for the assessment of internal controls, the assessment document itself includes a certification that the commission followed a process to assess and document adequacy of internal controls. What, can you just speak a little bit to what that process was?
I can actually ask Frank if you want. Do you want to mention anything about that, or Lisa? I mean, we have internal controls that are established for procurement, finance, bills payable, receivable, and how those duties are separated between the three people in the admin department. So it's the office manager, director of finance and ops, and myself. And those that is reviewed on an annual basis as part of the annual audit. That is provided to the auditors. The auditors look at that and then, do that as part of the annual review and make sure that we're in compliance.
Okay. And that all took place?
Yes. And there were no corrective action plans. Not to steal thunder from the audit, but that's what we'd like to have.
And were there any changes from last year with respect to the particular compliance documents that we're looking at?
Modify? I don't think we modified anything.
Sure.
No. Last year we modified things just to make it a little tighter, the way the language is, but this year we did nothing to it. That's fine.
Is there any discussion on any of these four compliance documents that are subject to this resolution? Hearing none, can we have a motion to approve?
Yes, Bruce will make that motion.
And a second?
Rice will second.
We got Steve. Everybody a chance.
All in
Thank you.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Action item C, multi-year contracts. Chris, could you give us a brief overview of what these contracts are?
I will. There are two multi-year contracts. One is actually a service agreement, but it's still really a contract. One is for TBS, Technical Building Services. They They manage the electronic HVAC controls and airflow controls for this facility, this building. And this is a 3-year contract for preventive maintenance, scheduled maintenance and repair that would go from July of this year through June of 2025. The total expense is around $16,000. It goes up modestly every year. And it's a 16% increase from the last 3-year contract. They are proprietary, so the controls are proprietary, so the company, they're the only company that can do it, but they're within the scope of other similar firms.
And there was no competitive bidding requirement because of the contract price point?
That's right. The second one is ADT Commercial. They monitor our fire alarm system here in the Discovery Center. That's a 36-month term. It's just a service agreement. It's $34 a month, up from $33 a month from the last few years.
Any discussion on these two contracts? If not, can we have a motion to approve? I'll make that motion. Can we have a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Action item D, proposed acquisition of 4019 Ryan Place.
4019 Ryan Place is in the town of Gilderland. It is in Blackberry Estates. Here it is on a map for some context. Get a little smaller so you can see. Well, not that small. So the red block here is 4019 Ryan Place. It's in a commercial subdivision, residential subdivision. It's a vacant lot next to, in between two built lots. It's about 3/4 of an acre. An individual approached me about 3 years ago to acquire it. It basically would provide the only access. You can't really see my cursor here on the screen that well, but to the west and north into these other properties that are recommended for full protection that are basically the back portions of developed properties on Curry Road extension. So this would give access to that. So the individual approached me and said, you need my property to access those properties. And I said, we do. It's assessed at a value that's probably way too high for us to purchase because it's a building lot. It's assessed at roughly $76,000 now. So the individual came back to me about a month ago and said, I'd like to donate it.
Nice.
So I actually had a conversation with him yesterday. He spoke with their tax attorney, and he's following up with some deed work. So this resolution just gives me the authorization to pursue it, and I would expect that it would go through. So.
And would we be getting title search and?
We would follow this would still require us to follow the real property policy, title search, title insurance. We would do all that just to make sure. Well, it's compliant. So,
Then do you follow up with the other landowners about maybe net agreements with the open space property? Or
yes.
the vacant land that they own in back of their.
Yes.
So would we essentially, if we do acquire, if the commission acquires it, would we build a new trail on the property in order to provide public access to those other lands?
Probably not. Because the trail system, the way there's the whole visitor experience and resource protection appendix in the management plan that went through the whole evaluation of, getting input from the public, what people want to see, and what opportunities they want to have to preserve, and then balancing that with the sensitivities of habitat. The trail system is pretty well set the way it is until maybe we acquire some more large properties to the west. I wouldn't see this as an area that we would put trail.
So this is an authorization or a resolution to authorize you as executive director to continue these negotiations and potentially close on the acceptance of the donation.
Yes, and I also will need approval from the Division of Budget for the donation. So if this resolution passes, then I can start that process.
Okay. So maybe can we add a language at the end of the resolution that says, subject to all applicable legal requirements? Is there any other discussion or questions on this action item?
Chris, if it's possible or appropriate after this this arrangement is consummated, it'd be nice to do something nice for these people, either in terms of publicity or, and I don't know, it's a nice framed picture of the pine bush or a letter from the board of directors or something like that. Maybe others, will be so inclined to do such things with their properties,
Yeah, John, I actually had thought about, we would do a press release on it with maybe a photo of the two owners of the property, but then holding a framed picture of the pine bush, well, that would be nice too. We'll do that. Good idea.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, can we have a motion to approve this resolution as revised?
So moved.
I'll make the motion. All right, go ahead.
Steve Rice makes a motion.
And a second?
Second.
Harvey beat John to it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and finally, the revised operating budget for this fiscal year.
Okay. So actually, this isn't in the update that I didn't mention, because it's in this resolution. Tyler Briggs, again, wrote a successful grant application to the U.S. Forest Service for a wildfire risk reduction grant, and we received that. We got the letter recently. That's a matching grant, so we will receive $150,000. We will match that with already budgeted funds, including staff time, training, etc. Then, as Tony mentioned, based on the budget this year that closed, the increased $400 million Environmental Protection Fund included an increase of $325,000 for the commission for our appropriation, which is great news. And hopefully that's something we will see moving forward. There continue to be $475,000 plus in rollover funds from the last 5-year contract. We had discussed this when we passed the original operating plan in December. Most of those funds weren't expended in 2022 because of COVID. I think we remember that. And then this is new, the $1.849 plus million was recently identified, thank you, internally by Management and Budget in DEC Central Office. And based on my history and looking back in files, it's funds that were encumbered but are now unencumbered, primarily because funds were withheld. The full appropriation was not provided to the commission for a number of years because there was not enough cash available, basically in the state for cash. So over that, and they would not roll over funds as they do now. So that has amassed to the tune of $1.849 million. So if we combine all that, we have a certain amount that we're going to spend this year. We will definitely spend that $150,000 for that grant, the Wildfire Risk Reduction Grant, which helps with habitat management for pre-treatments for fire and for fire. But we'll also spend additional funds, but not nearly all of what you just saw, up to about $320,000. And I'll tell you what that's for. But basically what that leaves is nearly $2.1 million. That's the highlight line here. This has to be in a budget because DEC has to have this to be able to process and move the money through. It will roll. So we are going to start planning for this in September as a staff, and then have a full budget meeting in October. But it needs some really good, solid planning looking forward. Habitat work, maybe land, maybe some work on the grounds or the interior of the Discovery Center. The Discovery Center needs windows. They're very inefficient, things like that. But those are future discussions.
So, Chris, you said, when does the planning start for those discussions on options for potential projects?
We're going to start as a staff looking at that September 14th of this year for not just April of 23-24 or 23-24 fiscal year, but moving forward.
So maybe by the December meeting, we can have
Absolutely.
a report on what the recommendations are.
The board will have a budget by the December meeting that will include some of these funds, certainly not all of them, because they will be pushed out over fiscal years. So just basically to summarize, of those numbers, those 4 sources of increased funding that's in this resolution, to go back here, we'll be spending, again, the $150 from the Forest Service, and of the remaining funds, about $320,000. Of that $320,000, $228,000 is directly for habitat work. That's additional habitat management with contracts that Joel and his staff will implement. And then the remaining goes for an additional seasonal for a seasonal environmental educator for 6 months. It extends our fire seasonals for 5 weeks. It provides for travel and training. It provides for a new phone system, $15,000 phone system, which is pretty reasonable. It provides for about $26,000 in science equipment, $10,000 of which are trail counters that Neil and his staff will install at trailheads to get an idea of how many people are coming through. And then $16,000 are for these level logger well counters. So it actually they automatically monitor the water well levels that are around the preserve that were installed by the city. So instead of trying to do it by hand, these electronically do that. You can track it. That's kind of a summary of the expenses.
Are those tracked in real time, or does somebody have to go out to the wells and retrieve the data?
So that we do have to visit them and download them periodically, about once a month. And it's not the city's wells, it's the wells that the commission put in.
Oh, that's right.
Throughout the preserve back in like 2012, 2013.
That Steve Rice and the students put in some of them, right?
Steve Rice and the students helped with some, and John Brust and his staff helped install a few of them.
That's right. Thanks. Good correction. That's right. Yeah, the city monitors our own.
Yep.
So again, like the majority of that 319 is 228 that's going for habitat work, because that's the most expensive. As you know, anybody who drives a vehicle, you know that gas prices have increased. Certainly diesel prices have increased, and diesel is what runs the equipment that does a lot of habitat work. So the bids that we've been getting in are nearly double from what we've gotten in the past. So it's very fortunate that we've got some additional funding to continue the habitat.
Might there be opportunities in the future to transition some of that equipment? I know I'm working with subcontractors.
Transition from diesel. When they start to create those types of equipment, there will be. As it stands now, feller bunchers and large backhoes.
Oh, we're talking about those. Okay.
No, yeah, they're not.
Not very powered yet.
Running those on batteries are probably, that's technology that may exist, but we don't know about it yet. But yeah, we'll get there. Does anybody have any questions on that? That's not the easiest. I did my best to keep it concise. We know how Chris is.
Chris, I just wanted to mention, so a lot of that work is forest thinning work, and one of the first steps in that process is having the timber crews marked, and DC Forestry is doing that work for us. They're actually out there right now working on about 80 acres or so. So just want to say thank you to them, because they helped us out a lot with just getting that baseline work done before we actually put the work out to bid.
Yes, thank you. That's a good point, because otherwise we would contract that.
Yeah. Is that regional forestry staff?
Yep.
Great. Yep. I'll pass it along.
Yep, thank you.
Unless there are any other questions or discussion on this, can we have a motion to approve the operating budget for 22-23 as described by Chris?
Move.
Nancy moves. Any seconds?
Second.
Sorry. All approved.
Enthusiastic.
Aye.
Aye.
And any opposed?
Okay.
All right, we're 15 minutes early, but let's move on to the presentations.
Frank. You can stand wherever you want, wherever you're comfortable.
Or you could sit in the chair.
You can sit in that chair if you're comfortable. Or you can stay in that.
I'm good.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Frank Ferrucci, partner with Wojcicki and Company. I'm here to present the results of the financial statement audit for the Albany Pine Bush for the year ended March 31st, 2022. We do have 3 reports, which we went through in detail with the audit committee last week. So I will try to do a high-level overview for everybody here, but hit the main points. If there's any questions, I can take those at the end. The first report that I'm going to go through is the report to the board. That's the required audit communication that summarizes our significant audit matters. You know, it's always important for the board to understand that management is responsible for the selection and use of appropriate accounting policies, which are described in Note A to the financial statement. There was no new policies adopted or required to be adopted in the current year. That would come down from the GASB. Accounting estimates are an integral part of the financial statement, and we have 3 very large estimates that impact the financial statements here. The estimate of the fair value of investments, the estimate of the funded status of the pension plan, and the estimate of funded status of the other post-employment benefit. Those are actuarially determined, but we do look at the factors and assumptions that go into those estimates and determine if they are reasonable in relation to the financial statement taken as a whole. I'm happy to report that we had no difficulties or disagreements in performing our audit or dealing with management. It's always nice to present to the board. We also had no corrected or uncorrected misstatements. If we did, we were required to accumulate those and communicate those to the board of directors as well. Management representations, in order for us to go final, you will see that these are still in draft format. Typically at this meeting, we are final issued. However, in the current year, there was some new statements on auditing standards that we as auditors were required to implement. One of those is looking at your annual reports and making sure that they are consistent with the audited financial statements themselves. So, in kind of a circular reference, we have the audit here in draft format, but they can't be final until you've approved Paris reports, which we have looked at for consistencies as well too. So, since that was approved shortly before this presentation, we'll be able to finalize these shortly thereafter. That is the report to the board. As I mentioned, that is a required audit communication. Nothing too crazy in there. I'm going to move over to the audited financial statements themselves. Pages 1 through 4, that's management's discussion and analysis. It is required under the GASB. It is a good read for you to see from a consistency standpoint year over year, and it does provide some context on the statements themselves. Since this is required supplementary information, we do not put an opinion on it, but we do look at it again for consistency to make sure that it matches what we've audited. Page 5 through 7 is our independent auditor's report. This does have a different look in the current year. One of the statements on auditing standards we were required to implement to change this report. It does bring the opinion to the top. That used to be in the back of the auditor's report. That is the first paragraph that you see here. This is an unmodified opinion. It is the highest level of assurance that we are allowed to provide under professional standards. It does expand disclosures on management's responsibilities for the financial statements at the bottom of page 5, along with significantly more disclosures on page 6 related to what our responsibility is as auditors. At the bottom of page 6 and moving on to page 7, that's where we make
comments on the required supplementary information, which has always been in your financial statement before. On page 7, the other information references the annual report and Paris reports. As I mentioned, we do look at that now. We are required to review that to make sure that it's consistent with the audited financial statements. If there were any material inconsistencies, we would ask management to correct those. If management chose not to correct those, we would have to state that in our audit report. There is no inconsistencies, so it is pretty standard communication here. And finally, that last paragraph, other reporting, I will go over that in a little bit because that does touch a little bit on the internal controls that you were talking about before and how we, what we do from our audit as it relates to that. So I will, I'll touch on that briefly. Page 8, this is your statement of net position. This effectively will be your balance sheet if you were a for-profit entity. You will see from a total asset standpoint, you are fairly consistent. The big fluctuations are in the cash and the grants receivable line. So last year, March 31st, 2021, there were some delays in funding related to New York State from COVID reasons. So that kind of shifted your cash position more to a receivable position. This year, obviously, you're more back to how we're used to seeing the receivables when you look at historical financial statements. Overall, though, the cash and grant receivable position is relatively consistent year over year. The other fluctuations you'll see down in the long-term liability section, the increase in the net OPEB obligation. This is an unfunded plan, which means there are no assets to support that liability, but this will continue to grow each year. This year, there was a change in the discount rate, which I'll show you a little bit in the footnotes. That does fluctuate that liability significantly and does drive that liability up since the discount rate went down. Your net pension liability, that is down in relation to the market. So that was valued as of March 31st, 2021. The market was a little bit higher, so that brings that liability down. That also is driving the deferred inflows, which are pension related below, and the fluctuation in that line. It is worth noting that since it is on a year lag, this liability is going to go back up. We do this presentation again next year. Page 9, statement of revenues, expenses, and change in that position. You'll see an increase in government grant income. Again, probably back to more normal spending in the current year, not so much COVID as you had in the prior year, 2021. Mitigation fees, those continue to go down as the landfill starts taking less and less in from a tonnage standpoint. Salaries are up. You had significantly more seasonal staff in the current year than you had in the prior year, along with raises and retros back to April 1st of 2020. You'll see your OPEB service costs that are up in the current year. As I mentioned, discount rate did go down as it drives those expenses and that liability back up. Page 10 is your statement of cash flows. You know, if you look at page 9, your operating loss was close to $1 million, about $960,000. However, if you go to page 10, this really reconciles that change in net position to an accrual basis. So you'll see your cash provided by operating activities is almost $800,000. And down at the bottom, it reconciles your net operating loss to what was brought in from a cash flow standpoint. So long story short, the non-cash entries related to OPEB and pension is really what is driving that decrease in net position. Page 11 through the top of page 15, that's your note A. Those are your significant accounting policies, which I mentioned have not changed. They consistently apply year over year. I do want to bring you to the pension footnote, which is note E, and that on page 22, where it talks about the sensitivity of the discount rate. So you will see here there's a required table that shows if the discount rate were to fluctuate up a percentage point or down a percentage point. So you're at a liability of $5,228. If the discount rate were to increase, you would be in a net asset position from a pension standpoint of about $1.3 million. However, if that were to decrease again, you'd be down in a liability of about 1.4. So long story short, these plans are very sensitive to changes in assumptions. That's really what I'm getting Same table on page 26 related to the OPEB. You know, you'll see there's some very large changes here if the rates were to increase or decrease as well. Page 27 and 28, this is our independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance, which is required when we conduct an audit in accordance with government audit. So to touch base on what you guys mentioned before related to the internal controls, you know, we look at the internal control environment in order to perform and plan our audit. However, if we had a deficiency in internal control or a material weakness, we are required to disclose that in this report. There are none that we disclose, so the controls that we looked at and the testing, the performance of that, there was nothing or nothing to report on. On the top of page 28, we look at reporting and compliance. If we had any issues when we conduct our audit or any instances of non-compliance, again, we would be required to disclose that in this report as well too. So to piggyback off on what Chris, you reported on before, there was nothing that arose in conjunction with that. Pages 29, 30, and 31 are required supplementary information related to your pension plan and your OPEB plan, showing what your portion. Page 29 discloses your portion of the net pension liability, which, as you can see, is very small. Page 30 shows your required contractual contributions to the pension plan. So you will see the commission has a history of contributing exactly what they're required to contribute, and there's no deficiency. Any contributions made either in current year or any years prior. And page 31 just kind of roll forward the change in the OPEB liability year over year, where you can see really where the increases in that liability are coming from. And as you can see, service cost is a very large piece of that. Again, since that is an unfunded plan, that liability will unfortunately. And finally, we have one final report, which is required to report on compliance with section 2925(3)(f) of New York State Public Authorities Law, which is in relation to your investment reports and your investment compliance. And we, in our opinion, the commission complied in all material respects with their investments and the policies and procedures that they have here. So that is a clean. And again, if we had any issues in terms of internal control or deficiencies related to investments, we would be required to disclose that. Those are the reports from our audit. If there's any questions, I can certainly take those now.
Okay.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
And I think it's worth noting to thank Lisa and Patty for all their effort, as every year is basically the same thing, where the auditors say, I can't believe how organized everything is. It's all prepared for us. It makes our job much easier. So thank you both.
Yeah, I second that as well too. That is part of conducting an audit. Obviously, you have to have support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, next presentation.
So we have the Carter Clips Challenge entries from Sarah Poggi Decker is going to talk to us about that. Sarah, there you are. Hi, Sarah.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me okay in the room?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I'm here to show you 4 awesome clips that we received as part of our Carter Clips Challenge. I won't talk too much about the challenges because Aaron presented about this at the last commission meeting, but we have some actual clips to show you. Just a reminder that this is kind of a committee project, so Aaron Keinel and Wendy Craney and Blake Hasty-Etchison and Kat Fitzpatrick, who's our seasonal educator, helped me a lot on this. We worked as a team, and Kat actually put together the video that I'm going to show you. So we asked people to create something inspired by the Carter Blue, and you'll see we got a whole array of projects shown in these clips. Our second challenge, these challenges are meant to be kind of fun and quirky. So the second challenge that is up right now is we're collecting clips of people's feet in the pine bush. So though that's in the works right now, but I will go ahead and share my screen and show you these clips. Can you see that okay in the room?
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
That's Savannah, and I'm 8 years old, and I'm gonna make a Carter Blue butterfly cake because I love to bake.
Won't be long.
all the time. It may have taken a lot of hard work, but this is what my Carner Blue Butterfly cake turned out to be. I hope you like it.
So we really enjoyed seeing the diversity thing from a cake to dances to artwork. So we were really surprised by the cool entries that we got. I'm happy to answer questions if anybody has any. Yeah, Steve.
I Sarah, how many entries did you get? Those were fantastic.
Well, we got 4. Those were the 4 that we got. But we'll take it. So yes, it was not a huge volume, but great quality, and we are hoping that it's the kind of thing that may gain momentum. So yeah.
Is there a place that they can be shown in like in the Discovery Center where people could see, oh, that's what they did, I could do that?
Yeah, so they are on our website currently. We actually had a plan to have them showing at Lupin Fest, but we had a last minute technology issue with the screen that we were planning to show them on. So unfortunately that didn't happen, but definitely something to consider and have in the works.
We're great.
Yeah, I saw it on Facebook.
Yeah, they're on Facebook too. Any other questions for Sarah? I just want to say one thing for Sarah. Sarah is moving on to her next chapter. So she's leaving the Pine Bush after 11 years. So a great big thanks for all your work here, Sarah, and wishing you the best in your next endeavors. We're sorry to see you go, but we're happy for you too.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's definitely bittersweet for me. I've grown a lot at the Pine Bush in the past 11 years. But some of you know I've been commuting from Catskills, so I'm really looking forward to a reduced commute. But yeah, I really thank the Pine Bush for all the opportunities I've had here.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Yep, yep.
Okay. Dylan, are you there?
I am.
There you are. All right. Amanda Dillon's our preserve ecologist and entomologist. She's going to show us some cool stuff with a microscope, the camera through the microscope. And it's based on the RCN, the Regional Conservation Needs Pollinator Grant project. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So thanks, everybody. I'm excited to have this opportunity to share with you some of what we've been finding. So I'm just going to start this morning with just a brief overview of the project that we're participating in. So in, I think it was 2018, a Regional Conservation Needs Grant was awarded to look at pollinators in xeric habitats in the Northeast. And this was because we know that these ecosystems are biodiversity hotspots, especially for rare and declining species, and especially insects. So the goal here is to provide some best management practices to managers in these ecosystems because many of them are disturbance dependent, and to facilitate that bee community, or that pollinator community. I should mention that it started out as a bee survey, and the last couple years they did add some moth surveys. So there is a website, northeastbarrens.org, that is managed by the individual who was contracted to kind of administer this project, and that's Elizabeth Crisfield with the Strategic Stewardship Initiative. And this is actually a screenshot from the website, which I wanted to put in here because that is the pine bush. So that's on their, right on their homepage. So there are a number of sites in the Northeast that are participating in this project. So that's what these kind of like green little points here are indicating. So here's us here at the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. The only other site participating in New York State is Rocky Point down on Long Island. But you can see that we've got sites up in Maine and northern Vermont down to Maryland. Now the effort put in by these sites kind of varies. So there are sites that just have done the bare minimum, which is still extraordinary and contributing to our understanding of these species across their range in these globally declining habitats. And then there's sites like us, we're overachievers. So we have 5 different sites that we're surveying as part of this project. And so what's happening across these sites is a team got together. I was part of the team that came up with the bee survey to lay out some methods that would be consistent from site to site so that we could pool the data at the end of it. And so these sites should have at least one transect where they're surveying bees, and then hopefully another transect nearby or on that same transect where they're also sampling the vegetation. And then some sites were able to perform some management, but be that silvicultural thinning or mowing or prescribed burning. So here in the pine bush, these purple areas are our 5 sites that we chose for this survey. So the Discovery Center is right here at this little yellow star. So we have what's called Alley Cat over in the Truax Trail Barrens. We have Bivy over in Carner Barrens West. We have Diversity, which is between Madison Ave Extension and the New York State Thruway. And we have Draperies over in Madison Avenue. And then we have one more site down here in Carner Barren, or in Blueberry Hill, called Green Taxis. So I also want to mention that 3 of these sites, Alley Cat, Bibby, and Draperies, were the same sites that I surveyed for the initial bee survey back in 2010. So in addition to looking at the effects of mowing and prescribed burning on the bee community at these sites, we'll be able to look at that bee community 10 years from that original survey, which is kind of cool. Now, 2 of these sites we left as controls, so they were not to be managed for the duration of the study. We're in year 4 right now of this study. So Alley Cat, Bivy, and Diversity were mowed in the winter of 2019-2020 in anticipation for a prescribed burn in 2020. Of course, COVID hit and put a wrinkle in that. So we were able to do the bee survey and the vegetation work in 2020, but we were not able to get the burn. So these were actually burned in the spring of 2021. So they did all receive a burn. So what we're kind of looking at now is maybe we'll have a season of data just looking at a mow treatment, and then we'll also have 2 seasons worth of data looking at that post-fire treatment. And then Draperies and Green Taxis down here are our control sites where we didn't do any management. So this is just a zoom in of those 5 sites. So in addition to having a bee transect where we're surveying the bees through this site, you can see all of these smaller transects are where we sampled the vegetation. So there's anywhere from 10 to 20 of these transects in these sites where we're running these transects and surveying the vegetation so that we can kind of tie the change in the vegetation to the bee community as well. So for surveying the bees, it is a destructive method, and I'm going to show you some bees at the scope so you can maybe get an idea of how difficult it is to identify these things and why we have to unfortunately use destructive methods to look at the species. So the 2 methods that we use are pan trapping. So these are small souffle cups that they're painted with ultraviolet paint that attracts the bees. They're filled with soapy water. And so the bees come to them and then fall in the soapy water. So these are left out for about a day, 12 hours at most. At the same time these bowls are out, I'll go out and do a targeted netting. So I'll go out along that same transect and I will sweep net for bees. And the reason that we use both of those methods is that the pan traps are not super great at collecting some bees. So these two methods really complement each other well and do a good job of capturing that bee community. So this is kind of a cool picture because this is one of the bee bowls down directly after one of the prescribed burns at one of our managed sites. So this is what it looked like. So far, this is some results we have. So this is, this figure was produced for a poster that I presented with Elizabeth at the Northeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies conference this spring. So again, we have all of the sites that are participating here. The color is the number of survey years that are included. So many sites actually did a pilot study in 2018. We didn't do a pilot study because we had a good handle on our bees here. So this is up through, so we have 2 years here. So this is 2019 and 2020. We did survey in 2021. While this number says 126, I looked at our data and we are up to 142 species that we have documented as part of this project. My whole list for the preserve is up to 190. So I'm inching my way to 200. But what's cool is we have a lot of effort here and we also have the largest number of species compared to these other sites. So the pine bush is kind of standing out here for the bee community. This is an image of right after a burn. So some of the effects that we expect to maybe see or as a result of this mowing and burning treatment is that we're going to increase availability of nectar and pollen resources for these species because it's going to knock back that scrub oak and allow those understory plants to really thrive. And the burn will also expose mineral soil. And so many of these species that are tied to these xeric habitats are sand nesters. They like to nest in sandy soils. And so many of them are ground nesters. So this is actually a ground nest right after a burn. So I did see this female come into this nest. She was a mining bee. I'm not sure which species, but this was really cool to see right after a burn that the bees were already nesting in the site. Okay, so now I'm gonna switch gears and I'm gonna show you some bees up close. It was really difficult to choose a subset of bees, but I think I successfully did. And this is just to introduce you guys to our bees and the complexity here that we're dealing with this number of species. So I'm gonna start with some apids. So that family is Apidae. Some of you may be familiar with the honeybee. That is in the family Apidae, but that is actually a non-native species. That's likely contributing to declines of some of our native pollinators. And there are lots of other bees in the family Apidae. So we're going to start here with a really common one in the pine bush. This is probably one of our most common species here in the pine bush. This is a small carpenter bee. Let's see if I can get this in focus. It's getting there. So this is a little carpenter bee that likes to nest in pithy stems. So this is a very small species. So she likes to nest in like rubus, like blackberry or raspberry stems from the previous year. So this is an extremely common species out in the pine bush, probably one of our most common species we find. Some other apids that we have. This is a digger bee. This is Anthophora terminalis. So this is a ground nesting bee. A lot of these native bees are actually also specialists, not only in where they're nesting, but also in the pollen, that they're the plants that they'll visit for pollen. So this one is Melisodes. So this is another little apid that we have. It is a ground nesting bee. So superficially, these two last ones kind of look a little bit like honeybees, if you don't know what you're looking for. So pretty cool. And then these are some of my favorite bees. I'm going to switch now to the leaf cutter bees. So this is a big, beautiful leaf cutter bee. Leafcutter bees, as the name suggests, they actually cut little circles of leaves from, or little circles out of the leaves, and they line their nest and chew those leaves up to make a pulp. And it actually kind of protects the nest, it waterproofs it, it gives it some antimicrobial properties. And so they are cavity nesters that line the nest with little bits of cut up leaves. The diagnostic character for leafcutter bees is that they have the pollen carrying hairs, where they actually carry the pollen is actually on the underside of the abdomen here. There's like a big delay here. Trying to, hopefully this isn't too painful for you guys. So a lot of bees actually carry the pollen on the legs. So the leafcutter bees are unique because they carry that pollen on the underside of the abdomen. Now, some of the characters that we're using to identify these guys, you can see this girl, we'll call this the forehead. So she has those big compound eyes, and then those 3 little eyes are called ocelli. Those are light sensing pigments. And looking at those ocelli to the back of the head, she's got a really, really big forehead, this girl. So that is one of the diagnostic characters for this species. Now, another very similar species here is Megachile. That one was Pugnata. This is Megachile latimanus. So this one superficially just kind of looks a little bit more gold. And if we look at the top of her head, she has a much smaller forehead. So those are some of our leafcutter bees. Also in that family, we have the mason bees. So these guys are also, they have the scopa on the underside of the abdomen. Let me see if I can, let me just put her like this, and then I'm not wiggling so much. Maybe it'll make it easier. So this is an example of one of the mason bees. So again, these are cavity nesters, but they're not cutting leaves. They're actually using mud to construct that nest inside that cavity. And one of the characters that we'll use for this species is the color of that scopa on the underside of the abdomen. So you'll see in this bee, it's white. So this is Osmia pumila. And then in this species, it is black. Those pollen carrying hairs are black. So this is Osmia atraventris. So it's very subtle differences between these guys. I'm going to switch to the Calides. So Calides are some of, if anybody sees those bees that kind of aggregate on the side of the trail, especially early in the spring, those are Calides. They're called plasterer bees because they make a plaster with their spit. And that's what they use to kind of waterproof their nest. They're ground nesters. The diagnostic character for these guys is, this is actually the tongue down here. And you can see that tongue is kind of nice and heart-shaped. And the head also has this nice heart shape to it as well. So these are a ground nesting species. This is a cool bee to see because this is actually a cuckoo bee. She is actually a parasite, a nest parasite of the Calides. So this girl actually sneaks in when the mother Calides is away from the nest, and she lays an egg, and then that egg hatches and kills the larvae of the other bee and then eats the pollen resources that that bee has gathered. So she's kind of the cowbird, the brown-headed cowbird of the bee world. She steals the resources that have been gathered by another bee. Now, seeing cuckoo bees or kleptoparasites like this is actually a really good indication for good indication of the communities, because these species will not exist if there isn't a good enough subset of what their hosts, what they're parasitizing. So seeing these kleptoparasites is a really good indicator of kind of the health of the community. I'm going to switch now to the halictids, which are some of our prettiest bees. These are the sweat bees. They're extremely diverse. They're one of the most diverse groups. This here is the most common bee collected throughout the entire survey area. So at all of those sites, this is the most common bee encountered. This is Ogochlorella aurata. Extremely, extremely common. It is, it likes sandy soils. It's a ground nester. And it's certainly here is also one of our most commonly encountered species. This is another sweat bee, much larger. This is a beautiful bee. This is one of the agapostemons. So these guys really, again, like the sandy soils. And I just want to show you, so We're going to zoom in a little bit here on this bee. So you can see how she has this really kind of coarse structure here, like this kind of wrinkling that she has on the back of her thorax here. So this is called the propodial triangle back here. And this is what a very typical agapostemon looks like. And when you catch tons of agapostemons, you start to see some really cool stuff. So this is the same species, but you can see those ruguli, or those wrinkles, are going 90 degrees different directions. So this is some kind of morphological abnormality. We're not really sure what went on with this bee, but for some reason her wrinkles formed in the other direction. So that's kind of a cool thing to see when you start collecting lots of specimens. I posted this to the bee monitoring listserv, and people were very excited about it. But many of our lasioglossums are not as easy to tell apart, or sorry, many of our halictids are not as easy to tell apart. So here are two species of lasioglossum. So lasioglossum is one of those really diverse groups, and it's very subtle differences between. So these bees look very, very much the same, but it's actually two different species. They're very closely related, and they're both sand-loving ground nesting species. And so the one here on the right is Lasioglossum pilosum, and the one here on the left is Lasioglossum leucocomus. And the difference between these species is kind of the angle of the cheek. So it's very subtle. These are closely related species. This one is a little bit easier to identify. This is one of our most commonly encountered species. This is a sand-loving bee. So this species cannot be found anywhere if there is not sand, sandy soils. This is Lasioglossum bureki. It has that nice yellow abdomen. I'll try to put my finger here so you can see. It's one of our smallest species. And this species cannot be found. Like I said, John Asher was a researcher who worked with bees in New York State, and he couldn't find this specimen, but it's one of the most common species that we find here in the pine bush. And again, in this group, we also have our cowbirds. So this is a nest parasite of the sweat bees. This is Phacodes. You'll see these sometimes flying around close to the ground. They're looking for the nests of unattended nests of sweat bees. And so same as that Epiolus, she's gonna sneak in when the female's away and then lay her eggs so that she can steal those resources gathered by that other bee. We have a lot of species of these. I haven't completely identified all of them yet. This is another fairly common leaf or halictid. So sweat bee that we have. I'm just gonna put her on her side so you can see her character. So this is Halictus ligatus. And the cool thing about this species is that she is actually what we call eusocial. So she is in the southern part of her range where it's warmer and there's a longer growing season. She can actually be social. In the northern part of her range, where there's a shorter growing season, they're actually solitary. So these species are fascinating to study for eusociality in insects. Her diagnostic character is this little point that's coming off the bottom of her cheek. So that's a pretty common species. All right, I'm gonna switch gears one more time. I promise this is the last time. And I'm just gonna show you some of the andrenids, or the mining bees. Reason being that a lot of the andrenids are actually specialists. So they will only collect pollen from like a genus or even just a species of plants. So these are species that are called oligoleagues or monoleagues. So they will only take pollen from a few species of plants. So seeing these species when they're tied to and a lot of these guys are tied to more ericaceous stuff like the blueberries and the huckleberries. And so seeing good diversity of these is a good indication of the habitat quality and also the community. So this is a yellow banded mining bee. This is Andrena hirticincta. I mean, she's aptly named. This is a big, beautiful Andrena regularis. We actually don't know a whole lot about this species, but I wanted to show you this big one so that you could see one of the diagnostic characters for the andrenas are these little fovea. So you can kind of see it really well here on the inside of those compounds' eyes. There's like these little patches that are covered in velvety hairs. Those are called fovea. And those are distinct to the andrinas. All the andrinas have these fovea. There are some other groups that have them, but that's usually a good indication that you're looking at an andrina. I wanted to show you some of the newest species. So this is hot off the presses. These are two of the two newest species I've identified so far. So this is Andrina brevipelpis. This is a specialist on rue or sumac. So I've only found one specimen of this, and it was actually found in our unmanaged site, which is not surprising because, I mean, Neil, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that sumac is particularly tolerant to fire. So it makes sense that we would find this species in the control site. The other newest one we have is Andrina melanocroa, and this is a specialist on rosaceae, so like strawberries and stuff she really likes. So those are two of our newest species. Here is the cuckoo bee of our andrinas. So this is actually in the family Apidae, but this bee, she's really beautiful. They're like red, yellow, and black like this. Again, she's sneaking into the nests of andrina when they're away and stealing their resources. And then finally in the andrina, we have some of these really tiny bees. These are later season bees. So this is a Perdita octomaculata. So the common name for these is fairy bees. I'm not sure why, but I love it. They're specialists on the Asteraceae. So I find them a lot on goldenrod late in the season. This is Calliopesis. These guys, most of them are oligolectic or monolectic. So they're really specializing on a very small subset of flowering plants. We don't see a whole lot of them. That one was actually a male. And then finally, this one was exciting, an exciting find because this is a New York State record. This species has never been seen in New York State. This is Pseudopanurgus solidaginus. And this one, as the name suggests, is probably a specialist on solidago or goldenrods. So this one is exciting because it's a New York State record. So hopefully you have an appreciation for some of the diversity of bees. I hope you enjoyed getting to see some of these bees up close. It's easy to overlook them, especially when they're so small, and just kind of write them off as flies or beetles or not even register them because they're so small. So hopefully this was enjoyable and educational for you. I am looking forward to analyzing our data. I've kind of seen some anecdotal things in the field, some explosions of certain species after the burns. So I'm really excited. This is our final season. I've already done our May survey. So we'll be doing surveys in June, July, August, and September. And then we'll be doing our veg survey one more time, and that will be it for the project. So I'm sure I will be presenting to you again once we have processed all that data. So I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any questions. Yeah.
Are you looking at any of the differences going from north to south and seeing if they correlate with the plants and the bees?
You mean like locally in the pine bush, or you mean for?
No. I mean for the whole study.
For the whole study.
Yeah.
Yes, that's one of the, I actually just met with the team last week, and that's one of the potential issues that we have to deal with. There are, if you want to pool the data across all of those sites, you're going to have some issues because there are some species that you won't find this far north. And also the community down south in May is going to be probably similar to the community we see up north in like June or July because of the delay, because of the different climate. So I hope that will be part of the analysis, but it is an enormous data set to try and work with. But yes, I would expect that we would see differences in those communities, but there are probably also a subset of bees that are kind of that we can use as indicators of high quality xeric habitats.
Dylan, will this information be potentially useful to track population trends over time?
So it's a little tricky because with the solitary species, we certainly could look at the abundances of different species. That kind of gets into that community type analysis where you're not only looking at the diversity of species, but you're looking at like, are there some species that are hyperabundant and some species that are more rare? So yes, I would hope that could be a component of it, but it is a difficult thing to tease out when you have effort filtered into that, as well as seasonality. So many of these species are only flying for 2 or 3 weeks in the season. So that can be impacted by when you actually survey, if you're going to get them, but also that particular year. So if we have a really cool spring, it's going to push everything back a little bit. So hopefully, yes, over longer scales, we'll be able to look at shifts in the community composition over time.
Dylan?
Yeah.
I don't know that much about bees, but what I do know is it requires highly specialized knowledge to do what you're doing. And I know you came here with some of that knowledge, but I just want to recognize the staff for allowing, Dylan to kind of continue to pursue this and develop her expertise to doing that. And so I think it's a great thing for the commission to have you here and to be able to do this work in a place that's really, clearly special for this group. How much of that, weighs in to the fact that the pine bush has got more species than these other places? Is some of that your expertise in being able to divide these species up finely, or is it effort, or is it that the pine bush, in your opinion, the pine bush just really is a species-rich place for pollinators?
I think it's probably a combination. I think it does have to do with effort because we have 5 sites, and a lot of the sites may have only had one site, one transect. They may have only done a survey over 1 year, which just doesn't tell you a whole lot. Also, I think the quality of our site. So we're pretty big compared to some of the sites. And also we've already been doing a lot of work to restore and maintain this habitat. And so I think that our Pine Barrens is in a pretty high quality state compared to some of the other sites. So I think that does contribute to it as well.
Great. Thanks. Keep up the good work.
Thanks. Thank you.
You have a question, Jim?
More of a statement. One, I wanted to say 2 things. One, Steve just took Dylan's skills are phenomenal, and we're lucky to have her here doing that bee work. And secondly, mostly, Tony, for your benefit, the regional conservation needs work that we're doing. This project is funded from money that's pooled by all of the DECs across the 13-state region of the Northeast. That's managed by the Northeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. So we wrote that grant, and we received $40,000 to do some of this work, but it's only by being able to cooperate and work with the state wildlife agencies from across the region who've decided on their own to pool some of their federal money to be able to support these regional initiatives for wildlife species that are at risk at that level. So I wanted to thank DEC and the Northeast Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, as well as Dylan, for being able to pull this project together.
Great. And at the end of the project, will there be a region-wide report?
Yes.
Yes, and so there'll be, yes, I'm on the team that's like working on how we actually kind of put all this together in a meaningful way. But we also hope to, since we've done such a very detailed study here at the Pine Bush, we also hope to produce our own reports and publications as a result of this survey.
We will.
Great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. Okay.
All right. Is there any other business that's not on the agenda that anyone wants to bring up? Then I think our next meeting is scheduled for September 15th at 9:30. And I'm assuming we'll plan for it to be a hybrid approach as well. Unless anything dramatic changes one way or the other between now and then.
Seemed to go okay.
Yep. And then after that, December 15th. So unless there's anything more.
Oh, wait. I just need to thank Wendy Crane for helping set this up and Patty setting up the room to try and make this work. I think it did work okay.
Thank you.
Good. So thank you both.
Good good to see those of you in the room in person.
First meeting in person since December of 19.
That's a long time.
Nice to be here.
Okay.
All right, I will move to adjourn.
I'll second.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you.